Good morning, everyone. It's great to be able to speak with you all today. My name is Richard Casey. I'm a primary school teacher from Kerry, and I'm just after finishing the Master of Arts in Christian Leadership and Education in Mary Immaculate College. And as a part of that, I wrote the following thesis, which I'll be sharing with you today. So the thesis was entitled, A Theological Critique of the NCCA's Current Recommendations for the Introduction of a New Relationships and Sexuality Education Program in Primary and Post-Primary Schools. Is it compatible with the Catholic ethos? So this is an area that's vital for us to know about as Catholics, to know the Catholic teaching on these matters so that we can speak up for the truths of the Catholic faith and help to prepare children for the future in a way that forms them well in the goodness, truth, and beauty of the Catholic tradition, and that prepares them to live a life of true love for others and true love for God, in which they are properly ordering their desires towards the ends of love of God and love of neighbour. So for the calls for a review of RSE came from the Minister for Education a number of years ago. The NCCA then was chosen to undertake that review. Of course, RSE was initially introduced in the Irish curriculum in 1995 and it became mandatory in 1999. Before publishing the report on the review of RSE in 2019, the NCCA also commissioned a research paper in 2018, authored by Keating, Morgan, and Collins. And in that paper, they promoted very much a liberal and secular understanding of relationships, sexuality, education. And that document then was referenced a number of times in the 2019 report on the review by the NCCA. So in the review, the NCCA consulted teachers, parents, students, and various stakeholders. And it used qualitative and quantitative means to do that: written submissions, surveys, round table discussions, etc. At the end of the report then, the following recommendations were included to be included in a future RSE curriculum. So you can see those there on the PowerPoint. You can see that consent and its relevance to all interpersonal relationships, LGBTQ plus matters, and developments in contraception are all to be included there. This is for primary and post-primary schools for the future. So as Catholics, we need to know what the Catholic teaching is on these matters, and we need to be able to speak up confidently and strongly about these matters, because this is going to be affecting our children for years and years to come, either as children, as you have them as parents or grandparents, or else as teachers in schools, the children that you'll be teaching. So there was a lack of clarity regarding the proposed findings of the NCCA. There were sometimes statements or proposals being made, and it was unclear whether it was a majority, a minority of stakeholders, or the NCCA itself that was proposing these statements and these recommendations. And so because of the lack of data then given surrounding the amount of people that were actually proposing or were saying these things, then it remains largely ambiguous as to whether certain statements made in the report were actually truly the consensus view, or whether they were actually just possibly sometimes small number of stakeholders proposing certain things, and the NCCA then including those to the exclusion of other viewpoints being put across in the report. But ultimately, we cannot know those things for sure without actually looking at the raw data, because the NCCA was not only compiling the data, but also they interpreted and reported on the data. And so we do have to critically analyze whether the NCCA was actually putting across all the data and interpreting it correctly and fairly. So the underpinning philosophy of the NCCA report, there is clearly a secularism underpinning the report. There's an exclusion of the religious and theological viewpoint. By what it includes, what it excludes, and by what it highlights, you can see a secular approach to RSE in the report. There are some religious voices included in the report, but it seems that they're only included in ways that will help to continue to promote the liberal secular RSE that's been promoted in the report, rather than putting across, let's say, the Catholic voices putting across authentic Catholic teaching that is absent from the report, certainly. There's a liberalism underpinning the philosophy of the NCCA report. So the view that people should be able to do what they like, so long as they are not impinging upon anyone else's autonomy. There's no explicit condemnation of things such as pornography, of promiscuity, because if people are free to do what they want and they are deemed not to be hurting anyone else in the process, then such things are considered licit. Of course, then we need to know, how do they interpret the word harm, or how do they interpret the word impinging upon, the phrase impinging upon someone else's autonomy. So harm is measured on the basis of consent. That's why consent is central to everything that they are proposing in the relationship sexuality education. So long as two or more people consent to engaging in a sexual act, then it's to be considered licit, even if it goes against objective moral norms, even if it goes against traditional Catholic teaching, then it's to be considered licit because the people consented to actually doing it. So consent is to be seen basically as making licit things otherwise, which would be considered objectively against natural law. And then expressive individualism is a certain strain of secular liberalism, wherein man is considered to be an atomized will inhabiting an instrumental body, and that people's flourishing comes from choosing and pursuing their own goals in lives, and that they shouldn't be inhibited from doing that unless it's impinging upon someone else's right to autonomy. So we see autonomy as the source and summit of all values, that people should be free to do what they want, even if what they want to do with another person actually goes against the natural law, goes against divine revelation. Then those things are rejected in expressive individualism. It's anti-teleological. There's not a belief in natural ends of man, and so therefore it's believed that man should be free to do whatever he wants, so long as no one else's autonomy is being impinged upon. So the Catholic teaching on sexuality and its rationale. Well, the Catholic teaching believes in objective truth on matters of faith and morals, that there are truths in these matters, and that our happiness comes from conforming ourselves to these truths. And this is where we find true fulfillment and true flourishing, by conforming ourselves to the truth in relation to God, in relation to our purpose in life, in how to live, and in how to act sexually. And so we believe then as Catholics in living the virtuous life, one that is based on faith, hope, and charity, and one that is based on the cardinal virtues. And so one of those cardinal virtues then is the virtue of temperance, and a part of that is chastity. So chastity involves respect for the creative mystery of the sexual act, respect for God, respect for oneself, and respect for other people as well. So it involves seeing people as created in God's image, seeing that they have innate dignity, not using them as objects just to fulfill our own desires. They're not means to ends, but rather they are ends in and of themselves. And they should be loved. They should be loved because of the fact that they're created in God's image, and that God loves them. And God has commanded us to love one another as Christ loved us. And so that then is how we are called to live. So each person is to be loved as an end, although the ultimate end, of course, of all things is God himself and the love of God. The Catholic anthropology then, this states that we're created in God's image, that our soul is the form of our body, and that we are created male and female. that men and women are different, but that we are complementary. The purpose of the sexual act is that the natural purpose is procreation and unity, and this is also confirmed in divine revelation. So Christ's teaching on this, that the two become one flesh. And so when a man and a woman have sex, then it should be properly ordered to those two natural ends of procreation and of unity. Unity being a comprehensive, bodily, organic union that is on the level of the psychological, spiritual, and the physical. And only a man and a woman can unite in that manner, because only a man and a woman can unite to make a reproductive unit. And so therefore we have that then from natural law and also from divine law. Are the recommendations of the NCCA report compatible with teachings of the Catholic Church? So in some ways, if interpreted correctly, then they are compatible in terms of respect due to each person, consent being vital, and happiness, wanting the happiness of the people, the children that will be receiving relationships, sexuality education. They're incompatible then, as I mentioned a moment ago, on the philosophical and theological differences in anthropological understandings. Expressive individualism holds that we're atomized will inhabiting instrumental bodies, that we can manipulate our bodies at will if it suits, if it helps us to achieve our desires and goals, our self-chosen desires and goals in life. That we could be let's say a different soul inside of our body, but as Catholics we know that this cannot be true, because the soul is a form of our body and that we are body soul composite. The positive human potential there, as I said, in relation to Catholic teaching. As Catholics, we believe that the pleasure that comes from sex and the relationship satisfaction that it gives us are good and beautiful, expressions and parts of having sex, so long as they're ordered towards the natural ends of procreation and unity. So sex must be ordered towards those natural ends, otherwise it is disordered. And so you can see it on the bottom there in contraception, homosexual acts. Since those acts close themselves off to procreation and to unity, then the acts are disordered. So in these matters, again, as Catholics, we must always say all people are included in the Catholic faith, all people are loved by God, but that does not mean then that all acts are good or that all lifestyles are good. The sexual act is good if it's ordered in accordance with its natural ends of procreation and of unity. If it's not ordered in accordance with those ends, then it is not good. It is not ordered towards its natural end, and so therefore it's disordered. And so these things are said to people not out of a way to exclude them, but it's a way to bring them to the truth about these matters, to help them to live the good and virtuous life, and to bring them to ultimate happiness in right relationship with God, with others, and with themselves. In consent there also, as Catholics, we believe that consent is necessary for the sexual act, but it must be within the context of marriage for that to be fully just. But for secular liberalism, then consent alone suffices to make a sexual act licit. And non-normative gender ideology also, so I talked about that a moment ago there. We know as Catholics that our souls are the forms of our body, our soul informs our body, and so therefore as a biological male I cannot have a different soul inside of me that's a woman or another different gender or non-binary. We know that our soul is the form of our body, and that our biological sex is what our gender is then. Then finally, what's the superior position? So as Catholics, we believe that the Catholic teaching on these matters is based on the truth that comes to us from natural and divine law, that it leads us to our true purpose in life, which is to know, love, and serve God better in this world and to be happy with God forever in the next. It brings us to the highest level of flourishing that we can experience in this life when we conform ourselves to God's law and God's teaching and God's love. And that then is what leads us to living truly loving lives, loving God, loving ourselves, loving others. And it truly frees us from the chains of sin and of vice, and it frees us in order to do what we ought. And so thank you very much for listening to this presentation. And hopefully if technology is working, then I'll speak with you all again in a moment.